They married for convenience, but when he touched her like she was his, she gave in. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. It was just past 4 in the afternoon when Savannah Brooks realized she was the last person left in the East Wing of the Maple Heights Public Library. The last readers had exited quietly, some leaving neatly stacked slips on the tables, others returning books with a kind of reverence, as if they were handling something sacred. The silence wasn't empty. It had its own presence, made of pages turning, the earthy scent of old wood and golden light filtering through the tall, dusty windows. Autumn had draped a certain stillness across the room that turned the library into a temporary refuge. Alone with a stack of newly arrived classics, Savannah was cataloguing titles one by one when she heard footsteps. They weren't rushed or aimless. They were steady, measured, intentional, and it wasn't common for anyone to enter that wing at that hour, especially not through the back corridor that led to the staff offices. She didn't have to turn around to know it wasn't just anyone. The shift in the air was subtle but unmistakable, like the atmosphere itself had grown heavier. When she finally looked up, a tall man was standing a few feet away, dark tailored suit, broad shoulders, short hair dusted with grey at the temples, a sharply defined jawline, and eyes so intensely blue they could unsettle even the most confident. But Savannah didn't rattle easily, or at least that's what she always told herself. The moment she recognized him, her body reacted like it had been jolted. Spencer Caldwell, the name behind million-dollar mergers, financial headlines, and discreet boardroom power plays. A man who would never step into a public library by accident. She stood, squared her shoulders, and kept her tone professional. "Good afternoon. Can I help you with something?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze moved slowly across the room, as if committing every detail to memory. Then he stepped closer and extended his hand. "Yes, Miss Brooks, I'm here to talk about a contract." What followed played out with the precision of a legal deposition. Spencer already knew who she was. He referenced academic articles she'd published, a lecture on archival preservation she gave at a local college, even an old blog post. Up to that point, Savannah assumed it was a professional inquiry, maybe a consulting offer or a potential grant. That changed the second he mentioned Ethan, her younger brother, the one who had been hospitalized for months with a rare condition, the one whose care had drained everything they had. "What does my brother have to do with any of this?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. Spencer didn't flinch. "Everything, if you're open to a proposal, a contractual marriage. In exchange, your brother will be treated at the Boston Medical Institute, fully covered. You'll also have long-term financial security. You won't have to worry about money ever again." For a moment, the words didn't register. Marriage, treatment, contract. It felt like the ground shifted beneath her. Savannah took a breath. "I don't understand." "Why me?" she managed to ask. His response was cool, like reading from a mental checklist. "I need someone discreet, educated, someone who knows how to behave in high-profile environments without drawing attention. You're not tied to the media. You understand confidentiality. That's all I need." Her heart pounded, but her voice didn't shake. "I'm not a commodity." He remained calm. "I'm not trying to buy you, Miss Brooks. I'm proposing something that could benefit both of us, and more importantly, Ethan." Then he placed a thick envelope on the table. "Read it. I'll return tomorrow for your answer. But one clause is non-negotiable. No one can know the real nature of this agreement. To the world, you'll be my wife, by choice, not out of convenience." When he left, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same. It had a new weight, as if even the bookshelves knew something had changed forever. Savannah slowly sat down and opened the envelope. Her hands trembled. The contract was detailed. It outlined Ethan's full treatment plan, the place where she would live, the security arrangements for both of them, the confidentiality terms, and most of all, the requirement that she appear publicly as Spencer Caldwell's legitimate wife. No mention of intimacy, no emotional expectations, just image, legal protection, and complete discretion. By the time she left the library, it was already night. She walked to the hospital without realizing how far it was. Ethan was asleep, pale, connected to monitors and IVs, but peaceful. Beside his bed, a pile of unpaid bills made it clear time was no longer on their side. Back at the tiny apartment they shared, sleep didn't come. Savannah spent the night rereading the contract, replaying Spencer's words in her mind. The way he spoke, cold, methodical, precise, but there had been something else. A flicker in his eyes, a pause that didn't seem rehearsed. By morning, she still hadn't made a decision, but deep down, she already knew she couldn't say no. Not if the alternative meant losing Ethan, and that she couldn't live with, not even in thought. The envelope remained tucked inside her bag as Savannah stepped into the hospital room that morning. Sunlight poured through the window, spilling softly across the bed where Ethan lay. His face still held the same pallor of the past few days. His eyes closed, breathing steady through a thin nasal cannula. It was hard to tell whether he was truly resting or simply drifting in a medicated fog, wrapped in layers of blankets and medical routines. Savannah moved closer, silently, feeling the weight of everything she carried, but refusing to let it show. She sat beside him, letting her fingers rest lightly over his hand, and stayed there for a long while, without speaking. Spencer's words still echoed in her mind, clinical, detached, but impossible to ignore. It was absurd in so many ways, and yet undeniably real. And the moment she looked at her brother, so still and fragile, she realized the decision had already been made. As minutes ticked by, she wondered what would come next. Would she ever find the courage to tell Ethan the truth? Would hiding it be a kindness or a betrayal that would only drive him further away? No answers came. And when a nurse walked in to switch out the IV fluids, the simple movement was enough to break Savannah out of her daze. "He slept well last night," the nurse said gently. Savannah nodded in thanks, trying to mask the exhaustion that lingered. Even in the way she blinked, the sound of the door closing behind her felt definitive, like crossing the threshold from doubt into certainty. The line had been drawn. She was no longer deciding. She was already committed. On her way back home, the city moved around her as if nothing had changed. People hurried to work, cars passed in a blur, and no one knew that she was about to make a deal that would alter the course of two lives. The taxi passed the same street where, months earlier, she and Ethan had stopped for ice cream after a hopeful medical consultation. He had laughed that day, full of energy, talking about the future. But the weeks that followed had drained every ounce of hope. The experimental treatment was their only chance now, and until 2 days ago, it had been completely out of reach. Now it came with a clearly stated price. She arrived at the library early, turned on the lights in the central section, and slowly organized papers at the front desk. Her movements weren't distracted, just deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if she needed the rhythm to steady herself. At exactly 10:10 a.m., as promised, Spencer Caldwell walked through the door. Same dark grey suit, same composed posture, leather briefcase in hand. He approached without hesitation, as if continuing a standard business exchange. "Good morning." Savannah stood, looked him straight in the eye, and replied without pause, "I accept." He didn't seem surprised. He studied her briefly, then placed another envelope on the desk. "We're on a timeline. The wedding will take place in 2 weeks. Legal documentation is already in progress. Your relocation is being arranged." Savannah kept her voice even. "My brother needs answers. His treatment has to start now." "It already has," he replied, matter of fact. The medical team's been briefed. The transfer will happen as soon as the paperwork is finalized. He paused, not long enough to seem personal, just a calculated beat. Your new residence will be ready tomorrow. Before leaving, Spencer opened the briefcase again, pulled out a small velvet box, and held it out to her. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single clear stone. It'll be necessary for public appearances. There are rumors starting to circulate. We need to make the image credible. Savannah took it without comment. Understood. He lingered for a second, as if expecting some sort of emotional response. When none came, he turned and walked out. The sound of his footsteps fading down the corridor no longer felt strange. It was the sound of a deal in motion. Savannah looked down at the ring in her hand, studying it. The symbolism, the contract, Ethan's life, all intertwined in a decision that couldn't be undone. Back at the hospital, she found her brother asleep again. The nurse informed her that the clinic in Boston had requested his medical records. It was official. The wheels were already turning. Savannah sat down beside the bed once more and pulled from her bag an old children's book they used to read. Together, when Ethan was little, she began reading aloud. Her voice filled the room gradually, even without a reaction from him. Even in the silence, she continued, page after page, because somehow it was the only thing that still felt normal in the face of everything else unraveling. As she stepped out of the room, walking slowly through the corridor, she spotted a familiar figure approaching. Dr. Nathaniel Pierce, white coat, folded over one arm, expression neutral. He's stable today, he said in a quiet, even tone. And how about you? She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. She simply nodded. If you need anything, you know where to find me. Savannah gave a quick nod in return, but deep inside, she already knew she wouldn't be turning to anyone. What lay ahead was hers to carry, and hers alone. The ringtone cut through the early morning hush of the apartment before daylight had fully arrived. Savannah, still half asleep, reached toward the nightstand and unlocked the phone screen. The notification displayed the name of Spencer Caldwell's assistant. The message was short and direct. An address, a fixed time, and the information that a driver was already on his way. No explanations. She got up slowly, tied her hair in a makeshift knot, and made herself a cup of coffee that ended, up untouched next to the sink. The engagement ring, still inside its velvet box, remained buried at the bottom of her bag. Everything was moving at a speed too fast to process. Just 2 days ago, she'd been a full-time civil servant, living paycheck to paycheck, juggling bills and counting every cent. Now she was following instructions from people she would probably never meet, swept into a structure that moved without pause, yet left no space for her voice. She left the apartment dressed in her usual clothes, but the black sedan parked outside didn't match anything from her old world. Tinted windows, a driver in white gloves, no greeting, just the door opened in silence. She got in. For the entire 20-minute ride, she didn't speak, watching the city blur past like a backdrop to someone else's story. The building where she arrived had a sleek facade, wide glass windows, and a lobby covered in pale wood panels. Ornamental plants, spotless rugs, and the subtle scent of lavender mixed with eucalyptus gave the place a polished, almost clinical feel. The elevator rose in complete silence, and when it stopped on the 6th floor, the apartment door opened. Without a sound, Savannah stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The living room was spacious, flooded with natural light, the furniture minimalist, the curtains soft and sheer, bookshelves arranged with calculated symmetry. The open-concept kitchen looked like a showroom, pristine, untouched, staged for a lifestyle that didn't yet exist. On the dining table, there was an envelope with her name written in calligraphy. Inside, she found a detailed schedule for the next 2 weeks. Legal appointments, photo shoots, press statements, receptions, with business partners, image consulting, social obligations, and the civil ceremony. Next to it, a smaller box contained a silver necklace with a discreet stone, described in the attached note as a traditional Caldwell family piece. She held it for a moment, not just trying to register the object, but everything it implied. This was no longer just about saving her brother. Somewhere along the way, she too was being reshaped by invisible hands. Later that day, she was taken downtown to meet with her assigned image consultant. The office was high in a mirrored skyscraper, its interior muted and elegant, decorated in beige tones and sleek glass cabinetry. The man who welcomed her didn't introduce himself right away. He simply assessed her. Thin frame, tightly tailored blazer, spotless shoes, rimless glasses, every detail in place. "Posture," he said, like someone pointing out that it was raining. "That's where everything begins." The session included instructions on how to cross her legs, where to rest her hands, how to smile without showing too much emotion, how to wave with subtlety, and how to pronounce surnames she'd never heard before but would need to know at the upcoming dinner with his family's associates. Savannah absorbed it all with a strange mix of focus and detachment. It felt like learning a foreign language she had no interest in speaking, but suddenly had no choice but to master. By late afternoon, back in the apartment, she opened the wardrobe and found a line of dresses hanging in neat order. Each one had a tag, sorted by event, color, cut, and fabric. None of the clothes looked familiar. None came from stores she'd ever shopped in. Each one reflected a choice made by someone else, someone who had already decided how she would be seen from now on. Shoes, handbags, and accessories were perfectly arranged on shelves. Everything matched. Everything served a purpose. She ran her fingers over one of the fabrics, feeling for a moment like she was stepping into the life of another woman. A character with a name, a role, a script, and no freedom to improvise. Before heading to the hospital that evening, Savannah made a quick detour to her former workplace. The library was closed for maintenance, but she still had the keys. She didn't turn on all the lights, only the desk lamp above the reception counter. She walked to the section where she used to rest between shifts. Wedged between two philosophy books, she had once left a bookmark with Ethan's name scribbled in her handwriting. She found it, tucked it into her purse, holding it as if it were the last tangible piece of herself she could still claim. When she stepped outside, the driver was already waiting. The car headed straight to the hospital. Ethan was still unconscious but stable. The nurse informed her that the latest test results had been sent to the international medical team and that the transfer to the Boston Medical Institute would happen soon. Savannah sat beside his bed and took his hand. "It's happening, Ethan. Just like you needed. Just like I promised." On her way out of the room, she crossed paths with Dr. Nathaniel Pierce, just leaving the surgical wing, still removing a pair of disposable gloves. He paused when he saw her. "He's getting better, slowly but steadily." Savannah acknowledged him with a subtle nod. Before she could walk past him, he added, "You seem different." She raised her eyebrows slightly. "Different how?" He paused, like someone who's physically here, but mentally somewhere else. She tried to smile. "Maybe I am." And before he could say anything else, she thanked him for his work and continued toward the elevator. Later that night, back in the apartment, she sat on the edge of the bed. The formal dress she'd worn earlier rested neatly over a chair. Her shoes were lined up beneath it. She stared at her reflection in the mirror for longer than she meant to. She still looked like herself, but the outlines were beginning to blur. The necklace sat on the nightstand, next to the printed schedule. She flipped through the pages again, a rigid calendar filled with appearances and deadlines. No room for delays, no space for mistakes. The wedding ceremony would take place in 13 days, at a private courthouse attended only by families, like his. She leaned her head against the cool wall, took a deep breath and closed her eyes. There was no point resisting. This was only the beginning. Dinner was set to take place at the top of a towering building in the heart of the city. The top floor was entirely reserved for high-profile corporate events, and from that height, the glass windows offered a nearly cinematic view of the historic buildings bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Savannah arrived early, just as the schedule had outlined. Spencer's assistant, who accompanied her, remained silent throughout the drive, handing her a minimalist black clutch with all the items she would need that night. Not a single word was exchanged. As Savannah crossed the entrance to the ballroom, she felt as though she were stepping across a boundary. Nothing in that space seemed accidental. The floral arrangements at the ends of the hall, the gleaming silverware set with surgical precision, the crystal glasses catching the golden light of the chandeliers, every detail acted like a code, and she was the only one who hadn't been born knowing how to read it. Upon arrival, her name was confirmed by a receptionist who led her to a private antechamber. A small team of professionals was already waiting. Hair, makeup, dress, rapid-fire instructions. Mr. Caldwell requested discretion with refinement, one of the stylists said, unveiling the fabric garment bag that held the evening gown. It was floor-length in a deep shade of blue, made of lightweight fabric with flawless tailoring, designed to highlight her fair skin without excess. The necklace left for her earlier, that same one she hadn't even had time to understand, would be the final touch. As the makeup was applied swiftly and expertly, Savannah tried to recognize the woman staring back from the mirror. The features were hers, but the version she saw was different, a construct designed to leave no room for doubt. When the team finally deemed her ready, she stepped into the main ballroom, already populated by guests mingling with glasses in hand and practiced smiles. It was the kind of setting where protocol mattered more than authenticity. Spencer was speaking, with a group of executives near the central table. Light-colored shirts, aligned ties, polite laughter. When he noticed her approaching, he didn't pause the conversation. He simply extended his hand. But even before that small gesture, his eyes had already searched for hers, and there was a brief exchange between them, just long enough to communicate what was necessary. As he touched her, he guided her subtly to the side. "They're all paying attention. Remember what we agreed on." Savannah nodded slightly. She knew the role she had to play. Her posture was steady, her gaze carefully composed. As they moved past the guests, Spencer introduced her directly. "My fiancée, Savannah Brooks." Hearing her name delivered so casually triggered subtle reactions. Expressions shifted in milliseconds, and even without hearing a single whisper, she knew each step was being scrutinized. The reactions weren't loud, but they were unmistakable. Throughout dinner, Savannah was seated to Spencer's left, as etiquette dictated. He conversed with a kind of functional charm, direct, courteous, never overstepping. His hands rested on the table with an almost instinctive command, and between sentences she could feel his eyes drifting subtly toward her. When the main course was served, one of the men across the table made a light-hearted remark. "We expected a more predictable choice, something strategic, as always." The sentence was left hanging. Spencer responded after a perfectly timed pause. "This union is strategic. She has everything I needed. It just wasn't on your radar." Some chuckled, others exchanged glances. Savannah remained composed. She focused on the way the light danced on the rim of her wineglass, trying to keep her breathing steady. The atmosphere demanded perfection disguised as ease. Later, Spencer stood to make a toast. He thanked the guests with a few measured words, mentioned the news cycle ahead, and in closing, directed a steady gaze toward Savannah. Recognizing loyalty when you're fortunate enough to find it is more than a virtue, it's a responsibility. The sentence hit with unexpected weight. It wasn't a declaration, nor a compliment, but something in it struck a fragile point, as if it had been meant for a part of her that hadn't yet learned how to respond. When the clinking of glasses faded, the two walked together toward a side hallway. Their driver was already waiting at the private exit. On the way to the car, neither of them spoke. Savannah adjusted the necklace with her fingertips. He walked. Beside her, his hand resting lightly against her back, a gesture almost invisible yet constant. In the car, as the city lights traced lines across her face, Spencer kept his eyes forward. "You handled everything better than they expected." Savannah turned slightly. "And better than you expected." He took a few seconds before answering. "I don't usually expect anything." That simple, definitive sentence ended the conversation, but not the discomfort. When the car pulled up in front of the building, she stepped out without waiting for assistance. He remained in the back seat, watching in silence. Only when the elevator doors closed did Savannah realize she was still holding the crystal glass. A small oversight, but a revealing one. She wasn't just tired. She was exhausted from holding up an identity that was already circulating among others before it had even taken shape inside her. The apartment was exactly the same as the night before, but when Savannah stepped through the door, it felt like unfamiliar ground. The clutch slipped from her hand and landed on the entry table. Her heels had left faint marks on the back of her ankles. The necklace weighed heavier than it looked, and her shoulders still carried the stiffness of hours spent holding the perfect posture. She went straight to the bathroom and stared into the mirror, facing a version of herself that seemed to belong to that night far too easily. Hair tightly pinned, makeup flawless, dress without a single wrinkle. There was no visible sign of exhaustion, yet inside she felt drained. The hot water cascading over her shoulders didn't wash the tension away. It eased the discomfort of her skin for a moment, but her mind kept racing, replaying scenes from the dinner, studying expressions, reviewing. Every moment Spencer had looked at her with a gaze she still couldn't quite interpret. Even after she removed everything, the dress, the necklace, the weight of the evening, sleep didn't come. Her body craved rest, but her thoughts wouldn't settle. Shortly after 8 in the morning, the assistant showed up again. Same, punctual timing as before. This time she was accompanied by a new image consultant, a young-looking man, tablet in one hand, slim portfolio in the other. Without speaking, they laid a digital portfolio on the table filled with articles published in the past 12 hours. Nearly every headline mentioned Spencer Caldwell's engagement. Some referenced the event from the night before. Others highlighted the bride's understated elegance. Nothing was damaging, but the message was unmistakable. Savannah was now part of a world where every gesture could be publicized. The consultant pointed out the importance of maintaining visual consistency. Sober tones, no drastic changes in hairstyle or wardrobe, and above all, never responding to journalists. He handed her a list of families expected at the next event. These are the ones who really watch and who never forget a detail. By afternoon, the dining room had been transformed into a training area. Books on etiquette were stacked beside handwritten notes. A camera tripod had been set up in the center, and the behavior coach, a precise woman with sharp eyes and controlled movements, began the session with firm, exacting guidance. How to walk into a formal room, how to respond when addressed by name, how to smile at a camera without seeming mechanical. Savannah tried, once, then again, and it quickly became clear how far the distance was between knowing what to do and actually making it look natural. The consultant paused her. "The smile is technically perfect, but it's not real. Try thinking of something that makes your breath change." She gave it another try, but wasn't even sure she could remember something that moved her like that anymore. That evening, alone, she reheated a soup the housekeeper had left in the fridge. She ate slowly, sitting at the kitchen table with the television off in front of her. As she finished, she tried to memorize the names she'd seen earlier, faces she hadn't met yet but would need to recognize soon. When she was done, she carefully washed each porcelain dish. It was unnecessary. Someone would come by tomorrow to handle it, but she insisted on the ritual. Maybe it was her way of staying grounded, or resisting the slow erasure of the woman she had been just days before. Someone who moved through life at a completely different pace in an entirely different world. Just before heading to bed, her phone buzzed. A message from Spencer. Brief, direct. Dinner served its purpose. Thank you for holding your composure. She reread the words more than once. There was no affection, no warmth, just confirmation that she had performed as expected. Still, the silence that followed spoke louder than the message itself. She placed the phone on her nightstand, turned off the lights, and lay down. But sleep never came. She stared at the ceiling, body heavy, mind fully awake. It wasn't frustration, nor was it anger. It was something quieter, almost like the fragile thread of an expectation beginning to form. Something she didn't want to admit, but already existed. A hope that at some point Spencer would stop behaving like a man merely executing a contract. The next morning, before attending to anything else, Savannah went to the hospital. The atmosphere was calmer. The medical team was preparing for the final steps of the transfer. Ethan would be leaving for Boston in 4 days. She walked through the hallways, already aware of that, but the doctor confirmed it with more clarity. The tests show signs of progress. It's still early, but there's a response, subtle but steady. It was exactly what she needed to hear. She sat beside her brother, held his hand firmly and whispered, "We're going. It's going to work." He didn't reply. His eyes were still closed, his breathing still supported by machines and tubes. But she believed. Because now, believing was what kept her standing. And because this new life that was starting to unfold wasn't only made of sacrifice, it was change. Unnamed, uncertain, but already underway. The invitation was delivered in person, inside a sealed envelope, with Savannah's name handwritten in gold ink. The aide explained that this wasn't just any event, but one of the most significant gatherings within the Caldwell family's social circle, the charity dinner organized in memory of Spencer's grandparents. Her presence that evening wasn't just symbolic. She represented the new image he was beginning to construct, one that was more grounded, trustworthy, polished, but carefully reserved. The image consultant used precise language to define what was expected of Savannah: controlled confidence, approachable elegance, humanity without display. In the closet, a pearl-toned gown was already waiting for her, featuring delicate straps and a flawless cut. Alongside it sat a box containing subtle earrings, and once again the family necklace, laid out on the table next to a card signed simply with the letter S. At the Astor Grand Hall in Manhattan, the lighting was soft, aimed at the curated art pieces and the central stage where speeches would be made and donations announced. Savannah arrived with Spencer, who was already waiting for her at the entrance to the main lobby. He wore a dark suit with understated lapels and said nothing upon seeing her. He simply observed her for a few seconds before offering his arm without a word. She accepted it without meeting his eyes. As soon as they stepped through the main doors, the flashes began. A low hum rippled through the space. She could feel the gazes, the polite smiles, the extended greetings and whispered comments. Analyzing every detail, still, she held her composure. Every gesture, every line delivered in public, every interaction measured. She understood it was all part of a choreography. And yet, Spencer seemed more attentive than usual. He adjusted her microphone before the speech, handed her water at just the right moment, and kept his hand on her back as he gently moved aside a guest who was getting too close. His speech came after the final dinner course. He took the stage with the composure of someone who understood the weight of words. He spoke about the Foundation's mission, emphasized the importance of social responsibility among the heirs of great wealth, and, toward the end, he thanked Savannah by name. It was straightforward, unembellished, but enough to turn heads. That single line seemed to validate her presence in that world. It wasn't sentimental, it was formal, public, and precisely for that reason, powerful. On their way back to the table, a woman with a crooked smile leaned in and murmured with light sarcasm, "Never thought I'd hear Spencer Caldwell thank anyone. You must be something special." Savannah smiled. Nothing more. She ran a finger along the rim of her wineglass, watching the blurred reflection in the crystal. When they left the venue, they exited through one of the side doors, far from the press. Savannah felt her shoulders drop for the first time in hours. Spencer opened the car door and waited until she was seated before joining her. The ride was silent. She watched the city lights blur past the window until she noticed the car veering off their usual route. She turned toward him. "An informal meeting with an international investor. I want you there." His tone allowed no room for refusal. She nodded. Moments later, the car pulled up in front of a discreet restaurant, almost hidden between buildings but luxurious inside, with wide-set tables and dim lighting. At the main table, a gray-haired man was already waiting. Brief greetings were exchanged. The conversation unfolded entirely in English, crisp and efficient. Savannah remained quiet, listening until the man looked her way and broke the formality. "He rarely trusts. If he brought you, there's a reason." She turned to Spencer, anticipating some kind of reaction. He kept his gaze steady. "She's the only person I don't have to filter my words with." The reply came effortlessly. It didn't feel rehearsed. It felt real, or at least like something he didn't mind admitting out loud. Back at the apartment, late into the night, Savannah slowly removed the necklace and earrings. The room was quiet, but her mind was still, spinning. Every gesture from the evening, every phrase spoken or left unsaid, every reaction on unfamiliar faces, everything pointed to a shift. There were signals that went beyond the contract, nuances. She sat at the edge of the bed, holding her phone instinctively. A new message appeared, just 2 words. "You stood out." No signature, no follow-up. But it was enough for her to hold the phone for far too long before setting it aside. She lay down, pulled the blanket to her shoulders, and closed her eyes. Her body craved sleep, but her heart wouldn't settle. And in the dark, she could feel something inside her beginning to shift. It wasn't part of the plan, but it was already real. The day of Ethan's transfer began with a clear sky, but the air carried the same quiet tension Savannah had felt in her chest from the moment she opened her eyes. The car was already waiting outside, engine running, with a driver assigned by the hospital's international liaison team. Ethan's personal belongings had been carefully packed the day before under the guidance of the medical coordinator. A full report from the Swiss facility had arrived overnight, outlining every step of the transfer. The specially equipped ambulance was scheduled to arrive that morning. Seated in the back seat of the car, Savannah stared out at the waking city. But her thoughts were locked inside that hospital room, where her brother was still resting. When she arrived, the nurses were completing the final assessments, and Dr. Nathaniel Pierce was reviewing procedures with the transport crew. Savannah stepped into the room without a sound, as though her very presence might disturb something too delicate to be touched. Ethan was awake. His eyes were open, alert. It was rare to see him that present, and for a brief moment, Savannah paused. At the doorway, unable to move, he managed a smile, faint but real, and reached out his hand toward her. She approached slowly, sat beside him, and wrapped her fingers around his. "You're going to get better," she said quietly, like a vow spoken into the air. He didn't ask where he was going or who was covering the cost. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he was simply too exhausted to ask. What mattered in that moment was the possibility, a real one. For the first time in months, the treatment felt like a reachable goal. That was enough. The kiss she placed on his forehead before the stretcher rolled out lasted longer than she expected. The ambulance pulled away, flanked by 2 black SUVs heading to the airport. Savannah remained on the curb, hands clasped tightly, her chest caught between relief and vertigo. Spencer didn't show up that day, but a bouquet of pale flowers arrived at the clinic hours later, accompanied by a handwritten note. "May her recovery begin in peace." Savannah didn't know what surprised her more, the gesture itself or the word he'd chosen. Peace. It wasn't a term she would have associated with him. That afternoon, she returned to the apartment and, for the first time since all of this began, turned off her phone. No calls, no updates, no polite instructions disguised as favors. She made tea, changed into an oversized shirt, and sat on the couch with one of the books she'd brought from her childhood bedroom. But her eyes barely moved past the same paragraph. The image of Ethan in the ambulance, the look on his face, stayed burned behind her eyelids. Early in the evening, the intercom buzzed. She expected it to be the assistant or the driver, but it was Spencer, alone, without notice, wearing a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up to his forearms. His hair, slightly unkempt, his expression unreadable. When she opened the door, he didn't step in right away. "May I?" She nodded, caught off guard. He walked into the apartment without saying why he was there, glancing around as if the space, temporary as it was, might reveal something about her. "I heard everything went smoothly." His voice was quieter than usual. "Yes," she replied. "He left this morning." A short silence settled between them. There was no script, no reason for formality. Then he reached into his pocket and handed her a small box. "It's just something I wanted you to have, nothing official." Inside was a silver bookmark, Ethan's name engraved in clean, subtle lettering. The gesture broke through a layer. She hadn't realized she'd still been holding. They sat on the couch without rush. He asked about the new clinic's physicians, about any signs of improvement, about what she planned to do in the days ahead, but it didn't feel like questioning. His tone wasn't invasive, only quietly attentive. When Savannah admitted that, despite everything, she felt she'd made the right choice. Spencer was silent for a few seconds. Then he said something she never expected to hear from him. "You've endured more than most would, with more grace than I think I'm capable of." She turned her head at that. He rarely spoke about himself, and never in contrast to others. When he eventually stood to leave, she walked him to the door, still holding the silver bookmark. "Thank you," she said, "for this." He paused. It wasn't just about the object. His hand brushed her shoulder lightly, and then he left. That night, Savannah didn't go to bed right away. She remained in the living room with the lights off, only the glow of the city pouring in through the tall windows. The bookmark sat on the coffee table next to the untouched cup of tea. She stared at the engraved name, wondering why Spencer had chosen that gift. It wasn't part of the public performance. It wasn't branding or image management. It was personal, quiet, intentional, given without obligation. And in the absence of declarations, gestures like that began to carry a different kind of weight. She tried to return to her book, but closed it again after a few lines. Her thoughts weren't on Ethan, at least not entirely. They were tangled around something else, something harder to define. Spencer had left the kind of impression that didn't fade with distance. She remembered how he waited for permission to step inside, how he asked about Ethan's condition, how he spoke of dignity as if it were rare, something worth pointing out. He didn't offer comfort in obvious ways. but in the way he observed. The space he allowed, the restraint he showed, there was a kind of respect she wasn't used to. For the first time, Savannah realized that Spencer didn't treat her as someone under his care. He didn't make decisions for her. He didn't diminish her choices. He simply made room for her to be. And in that world of appearances and hierarchy, that alone felt extraordinary. Rarer than flattery, more honest than promises. When she noticed, her tea had gone cold. She rose and walked to the kitchen, but instead of pouring it down the drain, she reheated it on the stove. That same night, Spencer stepped into his own apartment and set his keys on the counter. He removed his jacket, unfastened the collar of his shirt, and stood in silence, surrounded by dim light. He thought of Savannah. How she looked when she talked about her brother, the way she held that bookmark with care, her gaze unwavering even under exhaustion. What he saw in her wasn't fragility, it was resolve, quiet but absolute, and without meaning to, he found himself wondering how he would have acted in her place. He didn't come up with an answer, but one thing was clear. There was more to her than he had allowed himself to see. Much more than the contract ever suggested. Their arrangement was still complicated, but it was no longer distant. And that, more than anything, was why he hadn't been able to sleep. Savannah found the invitation as soon as she walked in. No envelope, just a firm card resting on the living room table, the letters handwritten in Spencer's unmistakable script. Steady, precise, to the point. Tonight, 8 p.m. Dinner. The driver will be waiting. No greeting, no additional comment, just the instructions like he always did. But there was something about the simplicity of the note that felt out of the ordinary. It didn't come with an agenda, spreadsheet, or the name of a foundation or business partner. It was just a dinner invitation. No adornments, no dress code, no hint of purpose. Savannah read it more than once, and even if she couldn't quite name what she was feeling, she knew it wasn't discomfort. It was a kind of quiet anticipation, not rooted in fear, but in sharpened awareness, as if she already knew that tonight wouldn't follow any of their usual patterns. Before 6, one of the household assistants arrived with a delivery. No labels, no designer names, just a soft, understated dress and a cropped wool jacket, carrying a faint scent she couldn't place. Mr. Caldwell requested something comfortable and informal, the woman said, handing her the box without lingering. Savannah closed the door and ran her fingers over the fabric. For the first time since all of this began, she felt no urge to return anything. She got dressed slowly, tied her hair back into a loose bun, and avoided heavy makeup. She was ready ahead of schedule. By the time the car pulled up, the sky had already begun to change color. As they left the city and the buildings gave way to trees and low houses, the route grew quieter. She realized she had no idea where they were going, but she didn't ask. The house was wide but single-story, surrounded by tall trees and gardens. That looked natural, not manicured. The stone porch seemed restored, not newly built. Spencer opened the door himself. Dark jeans, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, faint drops of water still on the cuffs. "I was working on the sauce. Come in." He spoke casually, like there was nothing to prove. He led her straight into the kitchen, where the lighting was warm and the scents blended in a familiar, almost comforting way. He handed her a glass of wine already poured, asked if she ate meat, and turned back to the stove like someone completely at ease in his own space, which of course he was. Savannah sat at the counter watching. Here, far from the meetings, the press, the gala functions, he moved with a kind of ease that didn't match his usual image. And the longer she watched him, the more she realized she might never have met this version of him before. They spoke in bits and pieces, interrupted by simmering pots. She told him about Ethan's favorite books, the stories she read aloud during the hardest days, and the recent worry that her brother might struggle to adjust to the new team in Boston. Spencer listened, without rushing. Not with the look of someone weighing her words, but with genuine attention. He didn't say much, but when he did, he shared that he'd taught himself to cook, watching videos, trying out recipes that helped clear his mind. "I've always been better with recipes than with long speeches," she smiled, and for the first time that evening she saw something vulnerable in his words, something that slipped past the polished armor. When he finished plating the food, he brought it to the table without ceremony, like it was something he'd done 100 times. There were no staff, no performance, just two people eating a meal made with care. After dinner, he invited her to walk out to the backyard. The path was short, lined with lavender and smooth stones, leading to a covered patio with an outdoor fireplace and 2 weathered wooden benches. The light there was soft, just enough to see one another clearly without invading the space. Spencer sat first and gestured for her to join him. Then he was quiet, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, it was direct. "Do you still see all of this as part of the contract?" Savannah didn't answer right away. She was used to practical questions, but this one required a kind of reflection she hadn't rehearsed. "I think it started that way, but not everything we've shared can be measured or counted." He looked at her, steady gaze, no pressure. "And what do you think matters most to me?" She turned toward him, holding his eyes. "Trust." The word lingered between them, heavier, more meaningful than anything else that could have been said. Spencer rested his elbows on his knees, looked at the ground for a moment, and then said something she wasn't sure was meant for her, but she heard it anyway. "You have no idea how many people smile at me and give me absolutely nothing real." Savannah said nothing. There was no right response to that, and he didn't seem to expect one. The conversation ended there, not for lack of topics, but because everything that needed to be said had been. On the way back, the ride was quiet. He walked her to the car and opened the door naturally. No touch, no promises, just that look, steady and unflinching, as if to say that night wouldn't be forgotten. And this time Savannah met his gaze and didn't look away. Something had shifted, a recognition, still undefined, but impossible to ignore. As the car pulled away, she sat in silence, but knew with absolute certainty that their connection was changing, and there was no pretending otherwise. The week leading up to the wedding unfolded with a meticulously arranged series of appointments, as if every hour had been mapped out long before any real feelings existed between them. There were legal meetings to finalize terms, image consulting, sessions, wardrobe fittings, and constant updates from the communications team. Savannah went through each stage with the punctuality and focus Spencer always praised, but something inside her felt slightly off. Since that dinner at his house, neither of them had taken the initiative to repeat such an intimate moment, and no new messages had been exchanged outside the professional script. Still, she noticed a shift in his gestures, the way he watched her during public events, the almost imperceptible care in pulling out a chair for her, or the brief touch on her shoulder when saying goodbye. These weren't grand displays, but they were consistent, and that made them powerful. The absence of any explanation only made their presence more noticeable in her thoughts. On the eve of the ceremony, her apartment was taken over by the team, in charge of the couple's public image. Beauty professionals, approved photographers, and even a corporate behavior consultant arrived with specific agendas. Savannah remained polite but distant. The dress hung on the bedroom door, elegant and understated without flashy lace or dramatic train. It looked like it had been designed to give the impression she had always belonged to that world. Around 4 in the afternoon, she finally had a moment of peace. She took off her shoes, put on a light robe, and made herself a cup of tea. Sitting at the kitchen table, she felt the strange sensation of being at the center of a spectacle she didn't fully take part in. It wasn't sadness nor frustration. It was simply the awareness of what this wedding represented publicly, compared to the emotions that until now had no room to be clearly expressed. The intercom buzzed with a single name: Spencer. No notice from his team, no media staff, no company car parked outside. She let him in without asking questions. When he appeared, he had his blazer folded over one arm and a simple envelope in his hand. No gift boxes, no speeches, just that. "It's not formal," he said as he held out the envelope. She opened it carefully and found a small black and white photo, slightly yellowed with age. In the image, an elderly woman sat in a garden that looked a lot like the one behind his house. On the back, a handwritten message read, "True bonds don't need to be explained, only upheld." Savannah stared at the message for several seconds. Then she looked up. "Why now?" Spencer didn't answer immediately. He sat on the edge of the couch and took a deep breath before speaking. "Because tomorrow, every glance in our direction will come with assumptions. I just wanted one thing between us to be real." She didn't respond with enthusiasm or caution. She placed the photo back into the envelope and set it on the table. Then she walked to the cupboard, took out a second cup, and offered him tea. He accepted with a subtle nod. They sat there for an undefined amount of time, talking about things not written into any agreement. His memories of visiting that old house with his grandmother, the books Savannah considered donating from the library that had shut down when she was little, the scent of wet leaves after a fall storm. Neither of them brought up the future or tried to define what they were experiencing, but something lingered between them, a quiet understanding that didn't rely on promises to make sense. She no longer tried to rationalize everything, and he no longer hid when he watched her for too long. The natural flow of that moment made it clear to both of them that something meaningful was taking shape, even without a name. When Spencer finally stood to leave, there was no rush, no formal goodbye. He stepped closer, stopping just a few inches away. The tension in the air was noticeable but controlled. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked, not smiling, not dramatic. Savannah held his gaze. She didn't need to say anything. Her answer was in the way her eyes didn't waver from his, and maybe, because of that, he understood without pressing further. He leaned in and kissed her. A kiss that asked for nothing in return, carried no promises. It was simply what it was, a genuine moment between two people who were slowly letting go of the idea that everything between them was just a contract. Her breath quickened, but she didn't pull away, and he didn't push past the moment. When he stepped back, he touched her arm gently and walked to the door, which closed softly behind him moments later. Savannah stayed seated, making no effort to dissect what had changed. She touched her lips with her fingertips, not like someone romanticizing, but like someone acknowledging a sign that could no longer be ignored. The dress was still there, hanging in plain view. The ceremony would go on as planned, with guests, flashes, and headlines. But inside her, something stronger than any vow or public statement was taking shape. The connection growing between them wasn't in the behind-the-scenes arrangements or media coverage. It was right here, in that apartment, in the shared tea, in that old photo handed to her with no strings attached. And even if she couldn't yet name what she was feeling, there was no denying it anymore. Something between them was shifting, and it wasn't part of the original plan. The registry office chosen to formalize their union didn't stand out at first glance. It was located on an old downtown street where the buildings held stories in every architectural detail, yet no tourist bothered to pause and photograph. Spencer's image team, had thought through every detail. The building exuded discretion, elegance, and above all, control. No tabloid reporters had been tipped off. Only two media outlets with whom the family had close ties, and those knew Exactly how far they could go, Savannah arrived in a separate car, flanked by an assistant who adjusted her dress with quick practiced gestures before she stepped out. The dress was simple and elegant, draping over her figure effortlessly. At collarbone height, the Preston family necklace looked as though it had been made for her. Her hair was styled to frame her face without revealing too much. Spencer was already waiting at the entrance, standing beside a building official whose tension was barely hidden. He wore a tailored suit and grey tie, with eyes more focused than she'd ever seen. No words were exchanged as they first met. He offered his hand, steady and sure, and she took it firmly. Together they entered. The ceremony was short, almost impersonal. The officiant read the documents with surgical precision. The witnesses signed in silence, and throughout, both maintained a composed posture. And yet, even amid the formal reserve, subtle details broke through the transactional veneer. The way Spencer angled ever so slightly toward her during the reading, how his eyes drifted to her face each time the officiant paused, how their hands briefly touched on the table during the signing. All these traces painted an emotional underlayer no one had been meant to see. When they exited the registry, the flashes were controlled and greetings measured. But the photos captured more than gleaming rings. They captured closeness. The way Spencer guided her with a hand at her back, steered her away from the curb at just the right moment, waited for her to enter the car before taking his seat. It spoke volumes. During the ride to the reception, there was a quiet moment before he asked, "Was it different than you expected?" She answered without hesitation, "I didn't expect anything. I just wanted to remain whole." He nodded slightly, an understanding gesture even without agreement, and that was enough. The reception took place on the top floor of a modern building, panoramic glass walls offering sweeping city views. Every detail had been attended to. Perfectly set tables, subdued lighting, music at just the right volume. Not so loud it interrupted conversation. The guest list was small but strategic. Business partners, influential family members, individuals who had been part of Spencer's world for years. Savannah moved among them with grace, introduced as his wife, yet without the pomp typical of traditional ceremonies. She knew she was being watched. She also knew each gesture, each reply would be interpreted as proof she was ready for her role. Despite that, she remained genuine, answering naturally, carrying herself with poise, smiling only when it felt real. At one point, a white-haired senior advisor leaned toward Spencer and said almost in confidence, "She has something none of the others did, elegance without pretension. It's rare." Spencer simply looked at her, no response, but plenty said in that look. When the dinner ended and guests began dispersing, the couple slipped out quietly through a side exit, guided to a waiting car that took them off their usual route. They arrived at a secluded modern house, surrounded by trees and wide windows, far enough from neighbors or city noise. Upon arrival, Savannah removed her shoes at the entrance and placed her purse on a side table with the ease of someone already familiar with the place. Spencer took a moment longer before stepping inside. When she turned toward him, she saw he still had the composed expression he wore during the ceremony. "You don't have to keep that up now," he said softly. "Here, it's just us." He removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and walked over to her. He spoke nothing, instead gently brushing her cheek with a fingertip, like checking if this moment was real. "You were the best decision I ever made," he murmured, "even though at first I thought this was just a contract." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. The kiss that followed was different from the others. No rehearsal, no hesitation. It was the culmination of everything held back until then. Savannah matched him naturally and guided him toward the bedroom without pause. The space was wide, lit only by moonlight streaming through open windows. Neither of them turned on the lights. Clothes came off one by one beside the bed, in calm sequence. No rush, but no doubt. When he touched her, it didn't feel exploratory. It felt like recognition of something already part of him. And when she welcomed him into her arms, there was no awkwardness, only surrender. Their union was more than physical. It was a quiet confirmation that they were no longer bound by obligation. No intermediaries, no clauses to respect. Just two bodies, two stories, finding a moment of respite. Amid so much control, they didn't speak during or after, and that was enough. Later, lying together with Savannah, resting her head on his chest and his fingers gently tracing her hair, the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was complete. She saw him, then not just as the executive, but as the man, the one who spoke with few words but conveyed so much. The one who preferred gestures over promises, who, despite his power, still remembered the smell of the trees in his grandmother's garden. As she closed her eyes, she didn't think about tomorrow or the public obligations awaiting them. She thought only of this moment, of what was truly beginning, unfiltered by any agreement, because tonight there were no cameras, no formal documents. There was her, there was him, and the real beginning of everything. The end. So what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.